Can Nigeria become a cow superpower? Well, back in July, President Bola Tinubu announced a new livestock development ministry. His government is planning to reposition cattle rearing as a critical sector. Now, he's been holding consultations with industry stakeholders and traditional rulers at the presidential villa in Abuja. Now, a presidential committee on livestock reform has been tasked with looking into the issue. Tinubu outlined the problem and summarized the solution that the body is suggesting.
A country of over 200 million people, I cannot serve our children 1 pint of milk in the classroom per day. Our shared mission is clear. We aim to transform the livestock from its current subsistence model into a thriving, commercialized industry like other developing world.
Nigeria is home to over 20 million cows. They're mostly owned by Fulani herders. It has the fourth largest cattle population in Africa, and rearing livestock provides a livelihood for a third of Nigeria's population. Now, Nigeria's dairy market is valued at $1.5 billion, but despite its size, almost 90% of local demand is met through imports. Abdulrahman Abdulrazak from the Nigerian State Governors Forum supported the proposed reform. Take a listen.
We spend billions in importing dairy products. If our herdsmen continue to roam, we will continue to produce 1 liter of milk per cattle. If we make them sedentary, they will begin to produce as much as 20 liters per day. We have the breed, like the Bokolo breed, that can produce as much as 5-6 liters, but because we're not, go to Europe, South Africa, all over the world where they have high dairy production, you see that the cows live like the upper class. They don't need to roam about. They don't need to do anything other than eat, drink, and sleep. But ours roam from Karanamuda to Ota. And by the time they get there, they're not going to give you any milk.
The co-chair of the Presidential Livestock Reforms Committee outlined what he says is a positive effect of the proposed reforms.
Significantly, reforming and repositioning the livestock sector would also help us to mitigate the perennial conflicts between farmers and herders, which have bedeviled the sector with negative consequences to peaceful coexistence, community relations, and beneficial productive activities.
So, where does this all leave Nigeria's cattle herders? As it turns out, some of them are not too far from the State House where that high-level meeting took place. But urban development, climate change and violence in rural areas are making it increasingly difficult for them to find enough grazing land. We'll be speaking to a representative of the Cattle Breeders Association in a moment, but first, DW's Fanny Facsar reports from the Nigerian capital.
Herds of cows roaming the streets may be a familiar sight in pastoralist areas of Africa, but not in cities like here in Abuja. The search for green grass in suburbia is frustrating for everyone.
Currently, it's easier to get around on foot than in a car. Look over here, all these cows crossing the road, blocking the traffic, and it seems like no one is taking the initiative to bring them to a better place.
Herders are grazing their cattle in urban areas because they were driven out of their traditional nomadic pasture. Trapped between climate change and urbanization, herdsman Alamin Usman says bandits are active in rural areas.
In the bush, there's bandits. So they'll collect our cow. Sometimes they are kidnapping us. So that is why we have no chance to go that side because of insecurity.
Finding grazing and water for his animals is a daily struggle for herdsmen like Alami. He walks for hours, often along busy highways, to the annoyance of other road users.
I'm not happy because I'm been blown on since to come out.
I think the government should do something about it. The cows are not supposed to be crossing the road. They should be in a ranch or something.
The government wants the cows here, in one of 4 grazing reserves outside Abuja. But the head of Nigeria's Cattle Breeders Association says the plan is not working for the traditionally nomadic Fulani herders.
So what is missing are these basic things: water and pasture. This is what an average pastoralist require.
Banditry and kidnappings are major problems. We can only enter the reserve with armed guards. It's not safe for herders or their herds.
It has been happening since 2014. Today we are talking of losing, our pastoralists losing about 4 million cows as a result of cattle rustling and due to activities of kidnappers, farmer-herder conflict. The insecurity also made it impossible for the pastoralists to stay.
The Fulani herders say the government has failed. They want to harness the potential of their herds. For Alamin, action cannot come soon enough. His cows are weak and hungry.
Sometimes because of no food, no grasses, they are chopping nylon or poison. Sometimes it's killing them. Cows are dying. Even yesterday, the small one died.
His remaining cows only produce a liter of milk each a day. That's not enough to ensure his family's survival.
This is my business. This is what I know. So it makes me worry.
So he's begun selling some of his animals. The profit ensures that his family can eat again, but in the long run, it's a move that will destroy his livelihood.
And to talk more on the Nigerian government's plan to bolster the livestock sector is Baba Usman Geuzarma. He was in the report you just saw. He is president of the Cattle Breeders Association of Nigeria. Welcome to DW News Africa. We have just seen in our report one herder struggling to feed his cows. He's told us he's now selling some of them because he's not earning enough from them. Now, subsistence cattle farming has been the way of life for the Fulani who you represent. President Tinubu says it is no longer sustainable. Is he right?
Considering, first of all, thank you for having me. Considering the challenges we have in the country regarding the cattle rearing, it is absolutely becoming very difficult for the cattle herders to sustain the business because the grazing areas are no longer there. Even those designated areas that are set aside for grazing are not being maintained properly. The grass that the cows consume are not there. Water is not there, and route linkages to various reserves where the cattle will follow and connect to other reserves have been blocked, maybe due to increase in the population that had brought about establishments of new villages, towns, and cities. So those routes are no longer workable for the herders. So, and coupled with the security problem we have in the country today, it is becoming absolutely difficult for the cattle herders to go on with their traditional way of cattle breeding in the country.
So the government now is proposing a commercial model where cows are kept in ranches that are mechanized and where farmers can produce at a commercial scale. So not roaming as they currently are, seeking for places to graze. Do you think that the pastoralist herdsmen that you represent could adapt to this model, could become commercial cattle farmers?
Not in the immediate future. You know, the cattle breeders we have in the country, they own 95% cattle in the country. They own the ownership of 95% cattle in the country. And they are all traditional cattle breeders who are practicing the primitive system of animal husbandry they inherited from their forefathers, because there was no attempt by any of the first administrations to try to modernize the trade for them to understand how valuable is the business for them. So they are today doing it as a way of life, as a source of livelihood, in the traditional way, as the only option they know to do for the cows to survive and for them also to survive, because their survival depends on the cow's survival. So you see, because of this traditional practice, anything new coming into it, it has to be a gradual process. It's not something that they can embrace immediately, because their peculiarities have to be taken into consideration before you come up with a model of settlement that can enable them transform from the traditional system to the modernized system of animal husbandry. It has to be a gradual process for us to attain the mechanized system of animal husbandry. But we can start somewhere now. And by starting, I mean we can come up with a model of settlement, whether it is a ranch or whatever. We can come up with a model of settlement that can suit the peculiarities of these pastoralists, because to them, this system of animal husbandry they practice is a way of life to them.
There have been consultations with the government on how to help the livestock sector. Are you satisfied with what you've been hearing?
Well, you see, this is the first time we are having a dedicated ministry for that purpose. This is what we have been yearning for decades, because of the neglect that the livestock subsector has suffered over the years. You see, under the agriculture ministry, balance is not struck, it's not well adopted between agronomy and livestock subsector. It is highly lopsided on agriculture, neglecting totally the livestock subsector. So with the creation of the ministry now, we now feel that more attention will be given to livestock subsector to the extent that the government can now tap the enormous potentials involved in the livestock value chain we have in the country. Consider in Nigeria that has over 20 million population of cattle in the country, going by the 1991 livestock census, because the last time a livestock census was conducted in this country was in 1991. So going by that statistics, we now have a little over 20 million cows. Even at this number, if you compare us to most of the neighboring countries that are surrounding us, you realize that Nigeria has a larger livestock population than most of these neighboring countries. But because of the neglect that the Nigerian livestock subsector suffers, one realizes that the GDP, gross domestic product contribution of those countries that have far less livestock population than Nigeria is higher than what Nigeria offers to the economy. You realize that in those countries, the gross domestic product contribution of livestock to the economies of those countries ranges from 30 to up to 50%. While in Nigeria, with our larger livestock population, the GDP contribution doesn't exceed more than 10%. It's just around 10-12% because of the neglect of the subsector. So with the coming of the ministry now, we feel government has now set the stage for the enormous potentials involved in the subsector to be tapped to the fullest for the benefit of the economy and for the benefit of the livestock practitioners. So it's really a welcome development. So we feel highly impressed and we feel appreciative to Mr. President for giving us a ministry for the first time, at least for the livestock subsector, the subsector's potential to be tapped to the fullest.
Right, that's Baba Usman Ngelzarma, President of the Cattle Breeders Association of Nigeria. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Nigeria's designated livestock development minister, Idi Muktamaiha, is an experienced cattle farmer. His state-of-the-art ranch in Kaduna is run in arrangement with Scandinavian dairy giant Arla. Take a listen to this clip of him from 2019.
I feel so happy, I feel so fulfilled. But more than that, I'm happy for the Federal Republic of Nigeria and our economy, and our citizens going forward. But I foresee a huge, robust relationship between Allah and some of these upcoming farms in the country. Instead of importing milk and exporting our jobs and profit, the milk can be processed here, the cows can be developed here for the benefit of the country.
And to get another perspective on the Nigerian government's plans to bolster the livestock sector, we've invited Dr. Chika Isiobu onto the program. She is an expert in African development and policy studies. Her work centers around promoting Africa's indigenous knowledge in development. Welcome to DW. So, Nigeria wants to develop the livestock sector into one that can address food insecurity and also contribute to growing the economy. You've warned against using a Western model to achieve this. What do you mean by that?
Thank you for having me on the program. Since Africa was colonized, Nigeria being part of the continent, it has been an emphasis on a Western model of development. And what we find today is that in certain cases, the West is moving away from that development model and searching for much more sustainable standards environmentally. But we find that African countries are still somewhat fixated on the previous development model that the West is looking for ways to leave behind because of the impact, the really catastrophic effect it has had on not just the environment, but on human beings. In this instance, looking at livestock, we see a situation where there is diminishing diversity of cattle around the world, livestock, because the West has promoted this idea of a particular breed or just selection of breeds that would yield much more profit monetarily, yes.
So as we can see it, the Tinubu administration is saying that, you know, the subsistence model isn't working. They would like to see bigger commercial cattle farms, so do you say. Do you at least agree with this, that the idea of herdsmen roaming around in the plains with their herds of cattle, that model is not sustainable, that the country should be instead encouraging bigger commercial farms that are more mechanized?
That's a great question that many are asking today. And what we find is that smallholder agriculture is much more sustainable in the long run than large commercial farming, especially in places like Nigeria, where the industry is still being established. After independence, many African countries rushed into industrialization with huge white elephant projects that today are abandoned across the continent. And it hasn't changed much from that time. Of course, Nigeria is still trying to get electricity to be constant. And how then do we jump into commercial agriculture? But this is a challenge that affects the whole world. It's not just Nigeria. And I say this because many in the world are abandoning agriculture for some commercial entity. While it should be a situation where more people should go into agriculture, more smallholder farmers. Again, the herdsman issue presents a serious security challenge, and that model needs to be re-examined. That model needs to be, but re-examining that model does not mean embracing commercial agriculture, which, if you ask me and many people who really understand the terrain in Nigeria, it will be a question of time before, again, these commercial ventures fall apart. We have a lot of them littered across the nation. So I would say promoting more small-scale livestock, keeping 10 cattle, 20 cattle. Come to a community, you have this person has 5 cows. We have that in Rwanda, and it's working great. Across Rwandan villages, you find people owning 5 cows, 10 cows. Every morning they have a collection center where they take their milk. And perhaps government might want to encourage more young people who are leaving school without any hope of employment to take on livestock farming within their little communities. Give them loans to start some, small 10, 15 livestock, 20 livestock, have milk collection centers, or, what they choose to do with it. Could be pig, it could be goat, it could be rabbit, it could be chicken. But more people going into agriculture will be the response to that challenge that many scholars will agree with at this time, especially considering the industrialization challenges that Nigeria and many other countries across Africa face.
That is Dr. Chika Esiobu sharing her insights with us here on DW News Africa. Much appreciated. Thank you, Chika.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.